Okay, back on the same stuff, just like always. As I say to people very plainly, you live inside the new heaven and new earth that was prophesied in Isaiah 65 and 66, as well as Revelation 21 and 22. The entirety of biblical prophecy has been fulfilled. You are not awaiting the fulfillment of any biblical prophecy. What we are experiencing today is essentially a series of very peculiar and sometimes quite comical misunderstandings. As I've said numerous times, the biggest issue in the Bible is imagery language. And today, the focal point of this discussion, I guess, is going to be on the letter or book of Revelation. A lot of times, when I'm having a conversation regarding Revelation, I notice that I and the person I'm speaking with focus on very different elements of the letter. So I'm essentially going to give you a quick overview on my argument as to why I roughly, just very loosely or very quickly, explain how Revelation is a fulfilled biblical prophecy. So when it comes to understanding an event, a person must be able to explain who, what, where, when, why. If you're not able to answer these questions regarding an event, it's pretty difficult to say that you understand the event at all. When it comes to dissecting biblical prophecy, what I notice is people focus a lot on the what of the prophecy. But there tends to be almost no focus on the when of the prophecy. So a lot of times there's not even a focus on the why of the prophecy. The focal point of interest for people today, at least the people I see, is entirely on the what aspect. A lot of times I'll tell a person, Revelation is a fulfilled biblical prophecy. No one, of course, believes me. But I'll say this to them and they'll be like, Justin, how can you say that? Where's the 100 million man army? What army was ever 100 million people? Surely that we were waiting for that to happen. Or when did a third of the trees on the planet burn up? How can you say the prophecy is fulfilled without being able to explain that? And all of those are, would I refer to them as good questions? I guess I would refer to them as they are questions at the very least. And they're fair. They're fair questions. They're reasonable. Well, I can agree with that. They are certainly reasonable questions. Sort of. They're kind of reasonable, at least. As I'm walking back my own statements, I don't mean to ridicule because I myself am from the very same persuasion. I used to look at Revelation as an unfulfilled biblical prophecy as well. I'm very familiar with that stance. But as time has come on or gone on, this view has become untenable to me. All right. And here's the reason why. Revelation was a handwritten letter that was written 2,000 years ago. Now, a letter is broken into three sections. It has an introduction, it has a body, and it has a conclusion. If an individual will read Revelation as if they themselves were the initial recipient of this letter and will read Revelation as a letter, you will find it's impossible for this letter to be pertaining to us today. Here's why. Revelation opens up in chapter 1, the introduction, by saying, I think verse 1 says roughly, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which was given to him to show his servants what is to take place with speed. So right here you've got essentially an impossible situation. A letter that's to take place with speed is a letter that is going to happen quickly. With speed, I guess, could also be translated shortly to pass, shortly to take place. An event that's shortly to take place, or that is approaching with speed, if it's being read from the initial receiver standpoint, think you're the first person to ever see this. Think of it as if you're holding this or you're hearing it read for the very first time back in the first century. You could never come to the conclusion that this is a prophecy that will remain unfulfilled for thousands of years. If an individual then continues in the introduction of the letter to verse 3, they'll find that it says that the contents of the letter are also near. So right here, you have a very firm set of text here. An event that's quickly approaching, swiftly approaching, or soon to come to pass, that's also near, is discussing an event that's happening in the initial recipient's life. To read the letter today in 2017 and say, oh, the return of the Messiah is near and close, makes zero sense. It was near and close then. which means he already came and you don't know what that is. And that's really what the problem is. So here in the introduction of the letter, the contents of the letter are discussed as being swiftly approaching and being near. So if you read this as the initial recipient, think of yourself as the first person reading this letter, this handwritten letter from John, what other conclusion can you come to? The only conclusion is that the contents of this letter are swiftly approaching and are near, meaning they are going to happen to us soon. Okay? If a person will then turn to the end of Revelation, now I'm by no means advocating that you don't read the letter, but for brevity here, if you turn to the end of Revelation and see the conclusion of the matter in Revelation chapter 22, the conclusion of the letter, you'll see that about 5-6 times inside the conclusion of the letter says the events contained inside the letter are again near and quickly approaching. I think actually 5 times in chapter 22, the conclusion of the letter, he says, I'm coming quickly, I'm coming quickly, I'm coming swiftly. You got to think to yourself, if you're the initial recipient of this letter, what conclusion would you come to as to when Jesus is returning and all the events in the letter are happening? You can only come to the conclusion that the event is happening to you in the first century. And I feel a little uneasiness inside myself as I say this, because a person is probably going to misunderstand me, but I can't really do very much about that. I submit that Revelation is a true prophecy, that this event has all happened and is being greatly, horrendously, that's not even a strong enough word to use, it seems, horrendously misunderstood, okay? I think it's a fulfilled biblical prophecy. I believe it's a fulfilled biblical prophecy. I think it's done. But if the letter has not happened, meaning it did not happen to the initial receiver, by default, the letter is false. A letter that says it's happening immediately to the initial recipient that did not happen to them is not a true letter. Is that a fair thing to say? Is that reasonable? Is that beyond? I don't think so. You got to really consider to yourself here. You're reading the contents of the letter and saying there hasn't been a third of the trees on the earth haven't burned up, thus the prophecy hasn't happened. Thus I'm awaiting for the prophecy to happen. But the prophecy says it's happening immediately, and the letter's 2,000 years old. The only logical possibility would be that the letter is true, meaning it happened to the first person, or the letter is false. In such case, you have no need to be worried of a third of the trees on the planet burning up. The letter isn't going to happen. I submit the letter did happen. I do not think a third of the trees on the planet are necessary to burn up in order for the prophecy to happen. In order for a person to come to the conclusion that Revelation is detailing an event that's happening in our future of 2017, they first must be able to explain how an event that's described as being near, as well as quickly approaching numerous times throughout the letter, how it is that this near and quickly approaching event is actually not near, greatly delayed, and not swiftly approaching, slowly approaching, being it's been 2 millennia since this letter was written, roughly. And from numerous private conversations, reading commentaries and everything else, no one can explain this. No one can explain, no advocate of Revelation being fulfilled in our future has an explanation as to why the letter says it's happening immediately. This is, what does man say, you know? This is like a logical conundrum of sorts, quite comical in a lot of ways too, because you begin to realize people are wanting things to be a certain type of way more so than it is that way, to put it, I guess, nicely. Anyway, in addition to that, I have also started writing a blog article sort of thing going on. I've got it here. Oh, I wonder what this is looking like on this screen. So this is a site I got here called The End of All Things. It's a WordPress site. I've got some articles on the site here. Behold, I'm Coming Quickly actually covers roughly the same thing I'm discussing in this letter. I break it out in great detail, show the words, give you the full argument. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about here and trying to make sense of it, without just piecing together all these random videos. You can actually go here, the end of all things site.wordpress.com, and I've got articles on there. I've only got 2 now, but I'm continuing to add stuff on there. So we're going to see how that kind of goes. But I have one called Behold Coming Quickly, which is regarding this very problem in Revelation. You can see it's extensive, so all the details are being covered inside of here. I try to write it in a good fashion. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just trying to get the information out, I guess, in any kind of way. I hope it helps somebody. I would love to see how people are going to have some of these, what kind of conversations a person could have with their leadership and eldership or whatever at their churches over things like this. But to date, I have not found a single person who can explain how a event that is described specifically as being near and quickly approaching is actually greatly delayed and slowly approaching. Go look at the words that are used, see how the words are used throughout the New Testament, compare the word usage by other authors or even by the same author, and you'll see this view is untenable. So yeah, indeed, you live inside the new heaven and new earth right now. The entirety of biblical prophecy has been fulfilled. So hopefully that helps somebody. Yeah, there you go.